president of the Berkeley City Club. I want to welcome all our club members and thank them for continuing to be members. And any of you who are not members, I want to encourage you to patronize the Berkeley City Club, either its hotel or its fine restaurant, which is available for takeout food for lunches and dinners Tuesday through Saturday. And if you're not a member of the Berkeley City Club, I wanted you to consider joining us at Berkeley City Club, which soon we're going to be past this pandemic and be able to offer our regular services. And with that, I will turn it over to my wife, Sandy, who's in charge of the program.
Hi, good evening. Sorry, we had a few technical difficulties at the beginning. We have a great double header for you tonight. And I almost don't know where to start talking about these two wonderful guests we have tonight, but I will start with Phyllis Grant. She's one of Berkeley's talented triple treasures. She writes, she cooks, she blogs, she takes pictures with her phone and an icon, all with skill, creativity, and a large measure of perfectionism. She says she's been writing her new book, Everything is Under Control, a memoir with recipes for her whole adult life. This slim volume, which started as a completely different, much bigger book, began when she was a young dancer at Juilliard, who in her 20s evolved into a self-trained chef in some of New York's most famous restaurants, and ends with her multi-tiered, often out of control life as a wife, mother, an accomplished chef, author, and photographer. Then she cut 2/3 of it out, a process I hope she'll tell us more about tonight. And by the way, the cover, which I can't find my book right now, we've looked all over, but it has a scattering of pomegranate seeds on the cover, or is it drops of blood? That was the 17th iteration of the design. A review in the New York Journal of Books describes Phyllis's book as a stark, spare memoir, the literary equivalent of a few bold slashes of color across a canvas. The book, the review goes on, briefly touches on loaded topics that could be books unto themselves: the culture of elite female dancers, being a woman in the restaurant world, coping with infertility, and surviving postpartum depression. Grant illuminates the human condition in sometimes breathtaking ways. This book is also a meditation on cooking, eating, and sharing food, as well as a tribute to Phyllis's matriarchs, her mother and grandmother, who modeled both independence and caretaking, balancing a career with nurturing a family. The paperback version of the book will be out in April, and Phyllis just finished recording the audiobook. Reading the poetic prose aloud, she told me, was a nice bookend to the long process of birthing this book. Finally, she said, every comma, word, pause, and beat felt right. So what's next for Phyllis? She's working on another book based on daily diary entries for a year. She started in August, writing about both life in this incredibly fraught year and what it's like to prepare to send her daughter, her older child, off to college next fall. Okay, so in conversation with the amazing Phyllis is the amazing Chris Colin, who's an award-winning San Francisco writer whose work has appeared on NewYorker.com and other online publications, as well as in print in, among other things, the New York Times, Outside, Wired, Smithsonian, and Mother Jones, and then in the 2019 Best American Science and Nature Writing. He's a contributing writer for California Sunday Magazine and another magazine called Afar. He says that he writes about what interests him, and those interests are, to say the least, eclectic. Here's just a sample. He's written about problematic billionaires, Japan's rent-a-friend industry, the effects of long-term worry, chimp filmmakers, as in monkeys, Burger King bathroom lawsuits, and perhaps my favorite, endangered noodles. To find that rarefied pasta known as threads of God, Chris had to make a frigid all-night pilgrimage that occurs only once a year to a remote hillside village in Sardinia. It was a 20-mile trek so unpleasant that he told his guide that if he died, she could survive by eating his body. And that was only 20 minutes in. These days, like all of us, he's sticking close to home where he edits an online newspaper by and for kids called, of course, 6 Feet of Separation. As an article about it in the New York Times explains, the newsletter includes poems, drawings, reviews, recipes, trivia, horoscopes, nature writing, and service journalism, with contributors ranging in age from 2 to 19. The 2-year-old, Chris admits, was a as told to piece. His latest book, OFF, is a picture book for grown-ups about a world without the internet. It's written in mock biblical style and will be out in March. His next book, Minor News, will be a serious book for grown-ups about, he says, the world revealed by the pandemic through kids' eyes. He's also working on a TV show, an expansion of the article that he wrote about the rent-a-friend industry in Japan. So without further ado, I'd like to present Phyllis Grant and Chris Colin in conversation at the Berkeley City Club virtually. Okay, guys, you're on.
Hi.
If everybody pins them, you'll be
Hi.
able to see them better.
Thanks, Sandy. Hi, Phyllis.
Hi, Chris. Thank you, Sandy. What beautiful intros. Amazing. Hi, everybody.
Thanks for
So many
having us.
familiar faces out there. I love it. Although I'm wanting to see Chris nice and big next to me, and I'm just trying to figure out how to do that. Speaker view. There he is, filling up my whole screen.
Oh, we're doing speaker view. Is that how we do it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Otherwise,
Hi.
I see so many familiar faces, I might get pulled in. But I just want to see yours.
Phyllis, thank you for
Chris.
being here with all of us tonight. It's 7 o'clock-ish on, let's call it a Wednesday. What would you normally be doing if you weren't Zooming here with us these days during the pandemic on a Wednesday night? And also, I'm going to ask you, what did you make for dinner tonight?
I made something from my book. I made some braised chicken. It just felt like the right thing to do on this sort of crisp night. And I'd love to read the head note for this recipe if I could, and you'll sort of understand. This I really feel like represents my style of cooking, which is pretty much dig around in the fridge, see what you find. Often anchovies and briny items are involved, and put them in a pot and slow cook some meat. So that's normally what I'd be doing on a Wednesday night, and I just did it a little earlier tonight. So I made some braised chicken. So here's the head note. When I want roast chicken, I go to my parents' house. It just tastes better when they make it. In my kitchen, I usually braise it, mostly because I am a bit of a wimp when it comes to cooking meat. And I am less likely to overcook it if I slowly simmer it in liquid. Before making this dish, I searched the back of my fridge for forgotten olives, capers, jalapeno pickle brine, and old wine. Now here's the embarrassing part. I save red wine from the end of dinner that I find in glasses and keep it in a mason jar in the fridge and use it for braises and stews. It cooks for a long time, so no need to be grossed out, although I know some of you probably are grossed out. So serve the tender chicken and the briny broth over a mound of creamy polenta, farro, mashed potatoes, or brown rice. So I don't know yet what it's going on top of. I'll figure that out in an hour, but that's what went down in the kitchen this afternoon. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That sounds delicious. Sort of sorry that I asked you that. It makes me feel bad about what we had. But that was from the back of the book. I'm going to try and describe this book for anyone who hasn't had the pleasure yet. Here, I'll hold up a copy. The first, whatever percentage, is narrative. It's a memoir. And then the last section is 17 recipes. I'm going to try and describe your book to you, Phyllis. You tell me if I got it right. Reading it, I reread it today. And I was really struck by how, for a succinct book, it's really about so many things. It's about growing up. It's about growing up in a very certain, specific, dearly departed era of New York. It's about how we change. It's about love. It's about parenthood. It's about approaching parenthood. And the interesting formula at the heart of it, to me, is that you add all these things up and you get food somehow. Did I understand this book correctly, Phyllis?
I think so. I think it might help to back up a little bit to talk about what this book was about 7 years ago. It was a bloated memoir. It was 400 odd pages of food in my life, but it was sort of like hitting you over the head with food. It felt sort of really sentimental, and it's always looking like, what am I cooking? What am I smelling? It just was so over the top. And food has always been there. I'm always talking about lunch at breakfast and what I'm cooking for dinner. I'm talking about that at lunch. I'm always doing that with my parents as well. But there's something about paring down this bloated memoir to something more universal that allowed the food to still be there, but not be the dominant emotion, sense, and so on. It somehow it allowed the food to recede into the background, and yet it is still there in not every sentence, but certainly every page. There's sort of the pulsing of that, and my passion for cooking and my use of cooking to get through hard times. It's certainly what I've used. Anytime I'm stressed out, I'll go cook something and I feel better. So,
well, why don't we back up and sort of talk about how you begin before you get to the Phyllis that you are today. You start out as a dancer, and then you proceed from that truly demented world into the totally sane, stable, healthy world of restaurants. And these are not just any restaurants. These are early 90s pre-Food Network restaurants. I was hoping you would talk a little bit about that scene, because I think it's very different from what an aspiring cook would encounter now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It was pre-Food Network. So pre-Celebrity Chef, pre all of that. And it was a time in New York, believe it or not, where you could pretty much go to the back door of almost any kitchen, walk in, say hi, and say, anyone need a little help chopping some carrots? And they were so grateful for the help, because there weren't that many people knocking on the back door. Whereas now, I think in order to get a stage at a restaurant in New York, you have to apply a year out. And, getting into some of these prestigious 4-star places would have been impossible if I had chosen to do this a year ago. But in the early 90s, you pretty much could work for nothing for a little while. And then they were so happy to have you that you get a job. So it was, but you also had to be willing to endure the crazy hours, 6 days a week, 17 hours on your feet, sometimes in a row, absolutely exhausting physically and emotionally. But I think I had that ability partly because I was a dancer and I lived in New York, and I just, I did it for a while and then I did fall apart, honestly. But I had the sort of strength and the desire and the fortitude to stick it out.
Well, I was going to ask you to say a little bit about the connection between dance and cooking, because it does seem like there is some interesting overlap, right?
Absolutely. They're pretty much the same thing, I guess, is what I would say. Sorry. And writing too. I feel like it's all coming from the same place in my brain. I don't know. It's they're all, for me, dance, cooking, writing, very physical. So when I write, I'm writing from the physical, if that makes sense. And when I am dancing, it's very much like I always responded to improvising in dance. And I would say it's the same thing in cooking, where I started doing a lot of pastry. That's how I initially got into cooking, but that's not my thing. I don't really like to follow recipes that much. I would say over the past 10 years, I've gotten really sort of loose in the kitchen, and I have this ability to improvise. And that's the aspect of dance that I loved. And that's the aspect of writing that I also love, that sort of free writing. All my writing starts, as I said, with that bloated 400-page memoir. It starts with that sort of, vomiting on the page, and then paring it down for years.
but even with improvisation and dance, I mean, that seems like there's a lot of rigor and also a lot of abuse that you have to endure in that world. I don't know, something you could tell us a little bit about, when you look back at that time as a dancer, and it's such a specific universe. What was that like, and what attracted you to it, and what sort of ultimately pushed you out of it?
Well, I would say when I was about 6 or 7, it's all I thought about. I mean, my whole room was covered with photos of dancers, and sort of like now, any spare moment I have, I'm moving in the kitchen. Any spare moment I had when I was 8, 9, 10 through 22, I was moving through space. A little obnoxious maybe, when I was doing the dishes, I was just always moving. So it's funny, I'm trying to think about my son who's always moving. This might be a genetic sort of thing, but I would say that movement translated really well into, as you said, the rigor of a kitchen. But having said that, I had the drive, and I was good, but I wasn't good enough, frankly. And that's why I stopped dancing. And that's why I stopped working in kitchens, because in some ways I felt like you have to love it more than life itself in order to endure it, especially back then. I think things are a little easier in some restaurants now, especially in California, not quite as intense. You don't work 6, 7 days a week. You're not 17 hours on your feet. You actually can sit down and have a family meal. We never even got to sit down. If we sat down to have a snack, someone would yell at us to stand back up. If we were sick, you worked when you were sick. I mean, it's pretty bad. And I think ballerina is probably the same thing. New York City Ballet back then, I'm sure it's changed, but back then nothing would stop you, even if you had the flu.
I feel like that's sort of inseparable from the version of New York that you lived in. Maybe you would read us a little bit about that era of New York?
I'd love to. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to start reading where I arrive in New York. And Juilliard at this time did not have dorms. So I was moving right into this apartment that I will describe right now. My mom and I get out of the cab at 93rd and Broadway, stand on the sidewalk, and look 7 flights up to my new home. A residence hotel filled with Juilliard students. She walks into the apartment ahead of me and takes it all in. Stained rug, bedroom windows facing an air shaft, no kitchen. We decide that the top of a left behind yellow dresser will be my kitchen counter. My mom opens a drawer and finds used syringes. She throws them in the trash without comment and takes me shopping for my first winter in New York City. I sit down on the floor of Bloomingdale's in an ocean of winter coats. They all look the same. It is 1988. There are lots of shoulder pads. I don't know how to choose. My mom picks out a black coat, a floral scarf, a whisk, 2 wooden spoons, a plastic spatula, a cheese grater, a hot plate, and a microwave. We eat all over the city. Cheesecake and French fries and mesclun salads with goat cheese, chocolate sundaes, tiramisu. Sun-dried tomatoes are everywhere. Nothing is seasonal. Everything is overpriced and oversized and overpackaged and over the top. We eat so we don't have to acknowledge what's coming next. But every time I look up, she confirms with a gaze, a smile, an arm squeeze, that I am just where I need to be. And then I need to look away. She flies back to Berkeley, leaving me in my kitchenless 1-bedroom apartment with a membership to the Museum of Modern Art and a book of her handwritten recipes. We are so hungry. We dance all day long, in the studios, in the stairwells, on the sofas in the lounge, down Broadway. It is my childhood dream come to life, the New York City package, 1988 style. Dance school, depressing apartment, leg warmers, straw basket bag like Coco on Fame. There are no dorms. We don't know how to cook. New York City is our cafeteria. white onion, cheddar, and tomato omelets with French fries in fluorescent diners, all-you-can-eat barbecue ribs at Dallas Barbecue, General Tso's chicken with free white wine, Ben & Jerry's New York Super Fudge Chunk ice cream, banana muffins with inch-thick streusel, airy blueberry scones, Haagen-Dazs bars, Doritos, and peanut M&Ms. We don't care what we eat. We just want to be full so we can do it all again the next day. My nightly soundtrack is made up of car alarms, a hissing radiator, and the frantic inhales and exhales of my assigned roommate trying to climb the walls. Several days a week, she puts in a James Taylor tape and run, slams her naked body against the wall, her hands and feet clawing at the chipped paint, sobbing as her body slides to the ground. I meet her older brother. He has scars over a quarter of his body, something about a backyard barbecue and an exploding can of lighter fluid, and the death of an older sister. He asks me to watch out for his baby sister. She tiptoes down the street as if walking on air, smiling hard at everyone, engaging strangers in conversations about the beautiful day, her light blue eyes brimming with tears, her ecstatic bliss changing mid-sentence to deep gloom. She buys a folding shopping cart at Bed Bath & Beyond that she pushes up and down Broadway. She bursts through the door with a new collection of gathered items, a broken lamp, 3 packages of stale mint Milanos for the price of 1, a man she met at Tasty Delight frozen yogurt shop. I shake her awake every day. I feed her granola. I tuck the hair behind her ears. New York City.
So I'm so glad you picked that section. It's one of my favorite sections of the book, and I really feel like it illustrates one of the things that stands out about this book for me, which is the vividness and the detail, and that is what sort of propels you through this book, is and through the sort of building of feeling that we get reading it, watching you grow up and move through your 20s and 30s. It's such a class for writers in how to create that feeling is through detail, not adjectives, but just like very granular detail about what your old roommate looked like when she walked down the street in New York City in the 1980s. So I guess my question is, where do you keep your 6,000 volume archive of Phyllis notes, and what was the process of mining that like?
Such a good question. Well, I guess
Or
I
do you
keep
have an
it in
amazing memory?
here.
Okay.
Well, I would say I have an amazing emotional memory. Not amazing, but I think, again, the way I write is sort of going back to, that's so interesting. Really what I was feeling emotionally when I was sitting on the floor in Bloomingdale's, overwhelmed by the shoulder pads, like really like physically how I was sitting. And I know my chest was caved in like this. Later in the book, I have quotes from my kids from when they were younger. I don't have them in the book as teenagers, and I wrote a lot of those quotes down so that I could use them on my blog or in a book like this. But I was very careful in the earlier stuff in this book to not have much dialogue, because it just didn't seem like a fair thing to try to recreate. Although I certainly remember what it felt like when my roommate's older brother told me that his younger sister had died in that fire. You know, the details like that, at least for me, things like that, you could never forget hearing those words and how you physically felt. And I think when this book was something different, many years ago, I was trying harder to recreate the dialogue and to overly explain how very difficult it was to live with this troubled young woman. And I don't think that telling the story necessarily needs that many details. I mean, I think just thinking about her walking down the street, I mean, she was so animated and so beautiful and so tragic, just the tears that were always about to fall. And so I think that's the detail that really stuck with me. And that's hence, why that's pretty much all I say about her. That and her running and trying to climb the walls naked. You don't forget that either when your first roommate, when you're 18, is doing that. It was rough. It was sad.
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like the moral here is that anyone writing a book should earlier write a larger book and then winnow that down to a much smaller book.
Sure worked for me. What was that?
What was the process? I mean, how did that? I mean, I'm sure that's a good question, but
I know I love it. I love talking about it because it's been a very busy 7 years. My husband wrote and directed a film that traveled around the world, and I was traveling a lot with him, or I was home alone with the kids, and it was a scramble. I never had more than 10, 15 minutes at a time to work on the book, but I carried it with me. I had it in my phone. I had it in my computer, in my purse. So I'd be in the carpool pickup line and I'd have 10 minutes and I'd pull out my book and I would, work on it and whittle it down. So it actually never felt like work. It felt like an escape from the hard stuff in life. It felt like a meditation in some ways. It was like a luxury, and it was off in the middle of the night, frankly. I mean, sometimes I didn't get to do it until the middle of the night or really early in the morning. But it was always such a pleasure to open up the laptop and say, I get to move a few words around. So that's sort of the general thing to say about the process. But I think the rewriting of this book was so satisfying. And as Sandy mentioned, when I got to read it last month, the audiobook, I was terrified. I didn't know what it would be like to sit in a booth and read my own book all day long. But it felt really good, I think, because of all that rewriting I had done. I really had made a choice about every single period, every moment. And some of, as you know, Chris, I have like when we get married, that section in this book, it's 2 sentences. But that didn't start out as 2 sentences. It's just the kiss, and then we ate 12 cakes. That's all that mattered, right? In the end, those are the sort of details that rose to the top when I started thinking about that day, that month, that all of it. It's the cakes and the kiss. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is sort of like it's like poetry. I don't mean that in a cheesy way. I mean in that everything's been distilled to its essence rather than a lot of words, which many of us writers do like to do, is sprinkle extra words into things. Okay, you mentioned your marriage and your relationship. That's certainly one of my favorite parts about the book is the way you captured not just falling in love, but the maturing of a grown-up relationship. Even the weirdly specific phenomenon of falling in love in New York, which I think is its own sort of genre of love in a way. What was it like writing about your relationship with your husband? Were there discussions? Were there ground rules?
No. And I would say that the story of when I first walked up the stairs to his apartment and I smelled the meals, all the family meals in the building, it was one of those stories that I have written for 2 decades and thought about and told and retold, and was even told at my wedding by my friend Marianne. She told that story of how we met. And so that story, no, I don't feel like there were any ground rules. But my husband did not feel as comfortable with the stuff about the kids. And I already sort of mentioned that. That's where we had some conversations about what was appropriate to put in this book and what was not. And I did end up meeting with a therapist. I read all the sections that involved my daughter to the therapist just to get some feedback, like, is it appropriate to put this in a memoir?
Yeah.
And my hope was that she would say it's fine, and she did. And partly why she said it was fine, and this is what I was hoping, is because it's really through my lens, my emotions. It's not about commenting on something challenging my daughter's going through. It's always through my postpartum depression, my inability to keep it all together, my sadness. And then my daughter is there, maybe she's having a tantrum, but it's nothing out of the sort of toddler norm.
Right.
So that was really reassuring, actually, to talk to someone.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask you about that. Your kids are older than mine. I'm nearing the age where I can't quite write brazenly about everything they do without feeling a little guilty or funny about it. So yeah, it's interesting where you draw the line. Have they read it?
No, I told them they could. And my friend Claire Dieterer, who has written several memoirs, she when I asked her if her kids had read her book, she's like, "Oh my God, no! Why would a 17-year-old want to read their mother's memoir?" But that does lead to something else, which is my mother dealt with a lot of postpartum depression. I certainly did with both kids, and I would like my daughter, if she's comfortable, to read the sections in my book that deal with that postpartum depression, just to be more prepared. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that sort of stuff I think actually could be helpful, just generationally. But I don't know if they're ever going to read it from beginning to end. Yeah, they've certainly eaten all the food, like the recipes, all 17 recipes. These are the ones I've been cooking for the past 17 years. So they eat the food, but I don't think they need to read these stories.
No, mine don't read my stuff either. I'm glad you mentioned the postpartum depression, because that was certainly one of the most powerful parts of the book. And I was so glad for the way you wrote about it, because I feel like a lot of supposedly candid writers will gloss over the real depth that a person can find herself in, and you don't. You were very honest and raw about it. Do you want to? I was hoping you could talk a little about that, or read about that. Either one.
Actually, I would like to read. I didn't mark that page, but since, as I said, I know it pretty well, I can find it pretty fast. Well. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it is kind of dark, but I think, just backing up for 1 second, I think that my hope, and people have already reached out to me about this, but is that women will read this and see, and it will normalize what they've been through. They'll see themselves in my stories, and that's one other bonus to paring this book down and making it more universal. It's not just my story.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm just going to dive right in.
Yeah.
My baby girl is in my arms all day long, tucked into my body all night long. We wake up in a puddle of breast milk that fills our ears, coats our hair, sinks down through layers of blankets and sheets and pads. My pee smells like her pee. My breath is her breath, sweet and milky and sour. We are a cloud of life and death and ferment. Exhale down, inhale up, exhale down, inhale up, faster and faster. Bouncing up and down on an exercise ball is the only thing that gets her to stop screaming. On each bounce, I hear my brain crack into my skull, and I feel my organs, already displaced from 9 months of pregnancy, floating around the cavernous insides of my torso, crashing into one another. If I put her down, she screams. If I hold her, she screams. Swaddling, swaying, singing aren't enough. I walk in circles around the block because I am scared to cross the street. I am scared to leave my nursing chair. I am scared I won't be able to keep her safe. One breastfeeding session leads into the next. I use one arm to hold her to my breast. With the other arm, I grasp the side of the padded nursing chair. I can't look down because I am convinced the earth will fall out from under me. Images pulse in my head, violent flashes in which I smash her brain in with a flashlight or throw her fragile body against the wall. Thousands of times, I watch her die. We sleep through the night enough times. I kiss her fingertips enough times. She one-arm commando scooches on her belly from the kitchen to the living room to the bedroom enough times. I start leaving her in the living room, walking around the corner to make coffee, believing that she will be alive when I return. I teach yoga. I cross the street. Cakes rise. We cover the living room floor with a tarp, strap her into her Graco Deluxe yellow and turquoise picnic patterned high chair, and open a dozen jars of baby food. I watch her taste. I watch her smile. I watch her taste some more. She doesn't need me. I start to fall head over heels. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I imagine you hear some pretty powerful responses to that section.
Definitely. Yeah. I set up a special email that's in the back of this book where people could reach out and tell me their stories or reach out for help. So yeah, it helps to talk about it. It helps to write it down. It helps to tell someone else it happened, because then it makes it real and it also makes it normal. Yeah. It can help. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if this is too much of a leap, but it makes me think of one of the themes that I think runs through the book, which is control. Control is central to ballet in the beginning. It's central to working in a kitchen. It's central to parenting, the surrender of control. And your prose is very controlled. Now we're living in a time where we're sort of out of control, or we have no control over the catastrophe that's all around us. I don't know, what's that like for you, and how do you handle it?
Well, according to my husband, not so well this week. He actually did tell me I like to control everything. It's funny, after 30 years, he's still telling me that, but it's true. I mean, I think that is how I handle it. I cook too much too late into the night. I make sure I do my yoga. I'm working on this new book. I'm checking in on the kid. They're upstairs remote schooling, and my husband's out in his office writing screenplay. And it's just, I'm always sort of checking up on everybody, and it's not necessarily good for them or for me, frankly. So it's this is like a therapy session now. I think I need to relinquish control a little bit. Yeah, but in the kitchen, that's what's keeping me sane right now. Yeah, but honestly, that hasn't changed. I'm still cooking the same amount of hours I did even before the pandemic. But I think that's the thing that's really keeping me grounded. Nothing's really changed. I was cooking, 3 meals a day for 17 years. So that's not changed much.
Well, I guess that's sort of surprising to me, as someone who has totally stopped doing ambitious cooking. And I've been thinking about that because I knew you and I were going to talk about this. I feel like for some of us, you have to have some optimism to put in the time doing all that dicing. I don't know. You have to feel like reality's sort of going okay to make it worth the effort to make something good and interesting. But you don't have that problem. You.
No, it obliterates the hard stuff when I'm chopping. I love the more chopping I have, the better. The more things I have to use up before they go bad, the better. Yeah. And I don't listen to music or podcasts or anything lately while I cook. That's the one change. I had to stop listening to the daily because it just was traumatic. The news. I don't listen to the news, and I don't think about the news while I cook. That is.
What do you think about?
I talk to myself about what I'm cooking. Yeah. I talk to the anchovies and I do. I never stop talking about, I'm thinking about what's next and I'm talking to what's in the fridge and what's in the cupboard and I'm bringing it all together. And I think that's how I keep the news and the bad stuff out.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I'll leave that one to your therapist, Phyllis.
Yes.
No, I'm jealous. I feel like when I'm cooking, I'm always like, what did it say? 1 teaspoon, 1 tablespoon? I'm always going back and looking at the recipe. And I whenever I watch one of your videos, I'm among the things I'm impressed by. It's your looseness and your freeness, and you're comfortable enough to improvise and apparently to talk to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How can we get there? How can we be more like you in that regard?
Well, I used to talk to myself in the grocery store. And I bring that up just because that's often where it starts. Not now, because I don't really go to the market very often, but my favorite thing would be to go to the grocery store for an hour and just talk to all the vegetables and figure out what I was going to cook. Now with a mask, it's easier to do it and not look crazy. But, experiment with leaving the recipes behind. Actually, I do have a thought. So the recipes in this book are the ones I've been making for 17 years. And every now and then I'll refer to them just to make sure if I haven't forgotten something. But I make the same things over and over and over again. So that if you're up for experimenting with that, try to make the same thing. Try to make the same-ish thing for 3 weeks straight. And you can let go, that you can throw the recipe away, and then it becomes yours, and then you'll have the freedom to improvise.
Okay,
guys, all right.
We're getting a number of questions from our audience, and I'd like to tell everyone that if you have a question, you can submit it in the chat function of Zoom. I forgot to say that at the beginning, but we have a number of people who have asked questions, so I'm going to read you a few of them. Okay. Somebody wants to know Phyllis, if you ever waited in line on a cold winter morning to eat at Barney's Greengrass, the Sturgeon King.
Yes, I did. Oh, I was just on Instagram this week. I posted an image of a cheesecake that I made that just brought me back to New York City, Cafe La Fortuna. I don't know if some of you know that place, and Cafe Lalo. So yes, many hours in line waiting for brunch in New York City. I love that.
Okay, someone else, this isn't really a question, but along the same lines, I suggest David Chang's Eat a Peach. Not as well written as Phyllis's, but real gritty, wanting to cook, honest, how I get through everyday chef stuff. Have you read it?
No, it's next on my list, absolutely. And I have another memoir, just so we're talking about food memoirs. Lisa Marie Donovan wrote a book called Our Lady of Perpetual Hunger, and it's a beautiful memoir about being a pastry chef in Tennessee. So just want to give her a shout out because she's an extraordinary writer. Lisa Marie Donovan.
And the book was called, one more time?
Our Lady of Perpetual Hunger.
I love it.
It's a gorgeous book. Yeah.
Okay. So someone else has asked, do you know what became of your first roommate?
Oh, I don't. And I did a lot of research to see if there was anything out there on social media. The only thing I did find was a story about her family and about the accident in their backyard. So I was able to verify the details of that story. But no, last time I saw her, she was biking up Broadway on a bicycle, smiling, the same sort of beautiful energy. But no, I don't know where she is.
Okay, this is just another comment. I just laughed when you admitted that you talked to yourself. Thank you for your openness and your honesty, Phyllis.
My pleasure.
Someone else says the same thing. I very much appreciate your honesty tonight with both of you. I hope you can post a link from this great interview on Instagram. Well, yeah, you'll be able to. We are recording it. Someone else, Phyllis, is curious about what advice are you going to give your daughter when she leaves for college?
Oh, now that's going to make me cry.
Yeah.
I don't know yet. Chris, help me. What advice am I going to give my daughter when she goes to college?
It's either do this or don't do this. It's one of those.
Yeah, I actually wrote a letter. I used to write a column for Food 52, and I can't remember what the recipe was, but the writing associated with the recipe was a letter to my 8-year-old daughter and things that I was teaching her then and that I wanted her to know when she was going off to college, things in the kitchen in particular. So I think I'm going to revisit that letter and then I'll write another one. So thank you to the person who asked that question. I think I need to write that letter to my daughter again.
So you alluded to this a little bit, but can you talk a bit more about how you've picked these 17 recipes? You must have had many that you were thinking
Yeah. So I had about 150, and these were really the ones, some of them are mentioned in the book, and I wanted people to have template recipes. So the idea, it took me a while to figure this out, but the writing of the narrative, I wanted to be similar to the writing of the recipes. In other words, I wanted people to be able to take these recipes and make them their own in the same way that I wanted people to read my stories and see themselves in my stories. So I really want people to take, for example, the salad dressing. And as I was saying to Chris, follow my recipe once or twice. And then I give all sorts of substitutions and things you can play with in order to make it your own. So these really are the 17 recipes that I made the most over the past 2 decades since I had kids.
Okay, someone else says, a question that often comes to writers, how do you structure your writing time? And you always do it late at night? Do you make yourself sit and write every day?
Yeah, I guess I don't make myself. It always feels like just a total pleasure and relaxation, which sounds totally bizarre maybe to some people, but I don't sit down very often. And when I do sit down, I try to write, is what I would say. Yeah, but you really do. I don't think there's any right time of day to write, right amount that you need to write, but try to make it a pleasure as opposed to a burden.
Chris, you want to answer that question?
No, I don't know. I haven't figured it out.
When do you work?
Like Phyllis, I've got kids at home right now. So, whenever someone's in the bathroom, that's usually when I get 2 minutes of work in. It's a little scattershot these days. But no, I keep meaning to have a system, like first thing in the morning. But I always end up reading the horrible news instead. Then
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so Phyllis, we talked a little bit, and maybe you'll talk a bit more, or at least maybe repeat what you told me. For those of you who don't know, Phyllis had a blog for how many years, Cooking with Dash and Bella?
It was active for about 7 years.
Yeah, and it was wonderful. So she was cooking with her kids when they were quite small, and they still cook. Can you talk a little bit now about how your kids cook and how you give up control of the kitchen to them, if you can?
Yeah, right. Well, as I was telling Sandy the other day, I'm always looking for the silver linings in this pandemic. And one of them is the kids have been cooking their breakfast and their lunch every single day. And I was telling Sandy, it's a little hard for me to keep my mouth shut sometimes. The smoke alarm did go off the other day, and the dishes are pretty epic. But I'm watching my kids just learn so much from cooking what they want for lunch, as opposed to cooking with me and me giving them instruction. They're finding a lot of sort of independence now in the kitchen, and I'm seeing the skills that I taught them when they were little. That they have some skills. I mean, they have the safety with the knife, and they know what to do. So I'm really grateful I taught them that sort of baseline stuff, and now they're cooking what they want, not what I want.
Okay, and someone else, we got maybe one last question here. What's an easy recipe for those of us who have been cooking so much during COVID?
Oh, well, I guess it depends. An easy recipe. I think a soup. I don't love soup, but I feel like just starting with some garlic and some onions and some carrots and some celery and so on, and then adding some white beans and some sort of chicken stock or veggie stock and building. I think it's easy because you build it with what you have in your fridge. So I would play around with looking at a few kale and white bean soup recipes and then make it your own.
Yeah, actually, I have one last question, maybe for both of you, since you're sort of tuned into the world of restaurants and chefs. Are your favorite restaurants going to make it? Have you been talking to any chefs in the area? How are they dealing with this? Any thoughts for those of us who want to support them?
Well, call your favorite restaurants and see if they're doing takeout. And if they are, do as much takeout as you can afford. It's pretty expensive doing takeout from some of these nicer restaurants. We've been doing that maybe once a month to support some places. But most of them, that's what they're doing right now. And I think they're about to shut down any sort of indoor or outdoor dining, right? So I think it's a great idea. Don't just trust what you read online. Give them a call and see what you can do to support them. How about you, Chris? What are your thoughts on
that? Seems like French Laundry's doing okay.
I know. Oh my gosh.
No, I don't know. Well, I don't. Instead of answering that, I will punt to you again, Phyllis. What's the restaurant I jab you in the arm tomorrow with the vaccine. What's the restaurant you run out to after that? What are you most excited to go to? Here, this is for the Bay Area folks.
Well, I want to go to New York City and walk and eat for a week. That's what I'm going to do. That's the first thing I'm going to do. Because I've been going to New York City by myself twice a year for the past, since I had kids, and that's been my escape, my vacation. So that's where I'm headed. Yeah. How about you? Where are you going to go eat after your vaccine?
Gosh, well, that sounds good. I might copy that in theory. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, I miss my local taco places, burrito places in San Francisco. So I'll probably get back to that. I love Al's Place in San Francisco for good stuff.
Okay, and we can put in one more plug for the Berkeley City Club. What days are they doing takeout?
Tuesday through Saturday.
Oh, cool.
I think 11:30 until 6 or so.
And till
most
7.
Days and 7 on Friday and Saturday.
Right. Anyway, I can't thank both of you enough. We didn't really talk about how you know each other, but I'm glad you do. Neither one of you could actually answer that question when I asked. They just do know each other. So thank you for giving us your time this evening and for this lovely conversation, and listening to Phyllis read was quite special. And we hope that we'll be able to see you in person. And those of you who are interested in their books, there were links on the PR for this program to our local bookstore. But if you're not in Berkeley or San Francisco, we urge you to buy their books at your local bookstore and help the independent bookstores survive this time. So good night, good luck, and thanks again.
Thanks, Sandy.
All right.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
so much. Thanks, Chris.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Sandy. Bye.
Bye.